1984 would see the demise of several micro manufacturers, including Dragon Data and Torch, who were snapped up by Acorn. By October, Sinclair had released a new improved version of the Spectrum, with as near a real keyboard as Sinclair could muster, and a larger, more computer-looking style. This was mainly in response to machines like the CPC, and it's no coincidence that its design began the same month the CPC was launched. Amstrad had its work cut out, and were keen to at least ship the 10,000 machines they had already produced. But by the end of 1984, a whopping 200,000 machines were sold to retailers, mostly during the Christmas 1984 build-up. However, demand among the public for home computers was still falling, and only 1.35 million of the 1.7 million micros stocked were actually sold, meaning 1985 began with a slow start. Cunningly for Amstrad, they had another ace up their sleeve. With established foreign export routes, several European countries also welcomed the CPC during 1984. Marion Vanier was running Amstrad's French operation, and having convinced Sugar she was up to the task of selling home computers, got to work, adopting the same marketing style used in the UK. Despite falling pregnant at precisely the most unhelpful time and spending 3 months in hospital, there was a roaring uptake, and 30,000 machines had been sold by March 1985, thanks in part to France being fairly void of any mass computing market at the time. Over in Spain, Jose Luis Dominguez in Madrid, the owner of Indescomp, began convincing Sugar to become the authorised distributor for the same reason. Initially, Amstrad weren't interested, but by offering to develop software for them, managed to wangle his way into Amstrad's offices, where he gifted the games for free on the basis he could resell the machine in his country. Sugar agreed on the basis that Indescomp would provide another 10 games, and by the end of 1985, over 50,000 machines had been sold in that area. The Spanish government even tried to introduce a tax on the import of machines with 64 kilobytes or less memory. This was introduced to promote homegrown computer manufacturers, such as Eurohard, who had just purchased the rights for the Dragon machines. Amstrad got round this simply by sticking an additional 8 kilobytes of dummy memory into the machine, renaming it to the CPC-72, and pretending that the additional 8 kilobytes was consumed by the new Locomotive Basic 1.1. In reality, it wasn't even usable. Thanks to further agreements with Amstrad, a market also opened up in Germany where the machines were sold under the Schneidner brand. Between 1983 and 1984, exports made up 13% of Amstrad's turnover. By the end of 1985, this had quadrupled to 53%. But it wasn't just exports that held Amstrad in good stead.
This is the new Acorn Electron.
The computer market had only really fallen out for the lower end systems, the Acorn Electrons, the Spectrums, the Oryx. Because the CPC was cleverly poised as a credible computer, for many it slipped just into the upper end of the market, a market many were seeking to transition into. Whilst many micros endured heavy price cuts during 1985, the CPC only received modest price cuts, in line with economies of scale, with the green screen version dropping to just £199. 1985 also witnessed the first CPC show at London's Novotel. However, it was notable that Amstrad themselves weren't concerned enough to actually turn up. The continued success allowed Amstrad to move once again. Warehouse operations were moved to a Shoeburyness plant, and the main offices to a 9-storey office block in Brentwood, Essex. The interior was in quite a state to begin with, apart from one floor which Amsoft took, allowing the rest of Amstrad to move in shortly afterwards. The CPC quickly captured some 25% of the home micro market, dominating in France, whilst coming in third behind the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 in the UK. But in his own words, Alan Sugar wasn't even interested in market share. His only interest was the bottom line, and to some these values felt evident in the CPC, some regarding it as a soulless machine. Amsoft and their user club were doing a good job supporting the machine, but it didn't feel as organic as perhaps other home micros did. The popularity of the machine meant many software houses were jumping on the boat, but due to the similarities with the ZX Spectrum, many games released were just poor ports, failing to take advantage of the improved hardware, and in some cases actually running slower. A well-made port would look like a Commodore 64 game thanks to the increased colour palette, but have the speed of a Spectrum thanks to the faster Z80 processor. A badly made port would likely look like a Spectrum game with a couple of extra colours in the title screen. However, even at this early stage there were several standout titles and many developers were smitten with the machine. Nick Alexander of Virgin Software noted that
if you compare the Amstrad with the Spectrum and C64, our programmer's attitude is that it's superior. It is the leader of the pack.
Whilst Ocean's David Ward is on record saying,
the Amstrad user base is newer and more active than the other machines. They buy more software.
It didn't take long for the big coin-op conversions to make it to the format, despite Sugar's dismissive attitude towards such fare, preferring instead to create cheaper clones rather than buy into the big expensive names. During 1985, spurred on by its success, Amstrad had several other projects already making their way into production. The first was released in April as the CPC 664, essentially a 464 but sporting a disk drive instead of a cassette deck, and aimed more for business applications armed with AMS-DOS and CP/M 2.2. However, the memory proved limiting and the design somewhat turgid. This machine was then hastily replaced by the superior looking 6128 just a few months later. 70,000 664s were sold to customers, now somewhat disgruntled given their machine was almost immediately out of date. But it was not an intentional strategy.
Now, are you going to offer any kind of trade-in for people who've purchased a 664? Because it's only been on the market for a few months, so they can upgrade to a 6128?
No, not really.
Sugar had pushed the 664 out, but Bob Watkins, unhappy with its design, had asked a designer to create something nicer on the side. With rapidly falling RAM prices, Sugar saw the appeal of a new, more professional design and launched the improved model in August, hoping to make an impact in the US market at the same time. The machine didn't make much of a dent in the IBM PC-compatible dominant states, but it was very well received in Europe, priced at a very competitive £299 with green screen and $399 with colour. Which magazine even awarded it a Best Buy, and it became the computer of choice in the rapidly expanding French region, with some impressive disc-based games following in no time at all. It even retained a tape port, so that existing 464 software could be played. The other machine unveiled at the same time was the PCW8256, a PC-like word processing CP/M based machine, released at the shockingly low price of £399, costing less than most electric typewriters of the time. Some sniffed at its aging Z80 processor and 3-inch discs, but the people where it counted, businesses, did not. The built-in word processor by Locomotive contained all the basic and handy-to-have features they could think of, with Sugar stating that advanced functionality was just not in the mission statement for the kit. This provided a perfectly easy-to-use machine, ideal for secretarial use in any business, but didn't see the point in splashing out 10 times the price for a PC compatible with additional printer. Amstrad's ability to give the market exactly what it wanted was quickly coined the Amstrad effect, and it ensured that city confidence was well and truly restored.
The system that people ought to be talking about, and which everyone can see, is the new system from Amstrad, the Amstrad PCW8256.
Along with these new machines, the truck driver and his wife, Image, had been shifted to the small business person or professional working from home, with newly recruited agency Delaney Fletcher Delaney creating advertising campaigns which really hit home this new target audience. The tagline for the CPC models was changed to "Who says business and pleasure don't mix?" Whilst over in America, a Curious Byte magazine described the CPC as
the closest yet to fulfilling my criteria for a useful home computer, including good keyboard, 80-column text, inexpensive disk drive and support for a mainstream operating system like CP/M.
1985 to 1986 would be a golden year for the Amstrad, with profits trebling from just under £10 million to £27.5 million, and Sugar's paper fortune increased to £188 million. For each Amstrad employee, effectively £500,000 was being generated. In May 1986, Sugar reduced his share of the company to 45.4%, raising £25 million in the process through shares which the market had absolutely no hesitation in buying up.
Amstrad, with hundreds of programs in education, typing, graphics, games, even music and speech.
Sugar was asked why he had reduced his stake and responded,
"It seemed to me about time that I reduced my holding in Amstrad in order to develop my interests outside the company. But Amstrad will still absorb all my management attention. I'm not starting a new company. I'm not building an electric car. I'm not funding any new developments. It's my own money."
The car reference, no doubt, a slight dig to Clive Sinclair and the recent Sinclair C5 debacle, something that would become ever more relevant as 1986 rolled on. In January, Sinclair launched the Spectrum 128K in the UK for £179.95. Sinclair still held 40% of the UK home micro market, and their latest machine would trump the memory capacity of most rival machines. However, all was not well in the Sinclair business. Sugar had been alerted to this whilst on a trip to Hong Kong by Dixons.
At Dixons, only the best will do.
Who happened to also have representatives in the area. Dixons decided to share some insider knowledge with Sugar that Sinclair was looking to sell their outstanding stocks of machines and possibly their business along with it. Dixons knew this because they had considered the purchase themselves, but due to the complexities involved, had instead decided to alert Amstrad. Sugar knew that he could make the Sinclair operation more efficient and quickly turn around a profit on the still dominating brand, and upon landing in the UK acquired one of the new Spectrum machines and asked his engineers and manufacturing companies to roughly cost up a cost-reduced version of the machine. Following a tense deal with Sinclair and its creditors, favourable terms were finally agreed on the 7th of April 1986, which would allow Amstrad to recoup profit within a year. Buying the Sinclair computer brand, along with its intellectual property, for £5 million. Sugar also bought out the existing stock from Sinclair's creditors for £11 million, and within a few months created the Spectrum Plus 2 system, a cost-reduced version of the 128K Spectrum, incorporating a tape drive much like the CPC. This rapid turnout was in part helped by Amstrad coincidentally hiring one of the original Spectrum designers, Richard Altwasser, just a few months prior, as they sought to bring their entire computer engineering team in-house rather than continuing to rely on outsourced developers such as MEJ Electronics. Richard was able to help ensure the Plus 2 was in production by the end of July to meet the Christmas season, with production quickly outsourced to Amstrad's manufacturers in the Far East, and Sugar remarking,
"We would like to manufacture in the United Kingdom, but we're a computer company, not a benevolent society,"
and demonstrating the exact skills which would allow Sinclair to continue as a successful brand. Clive would later comment,
"Alan makes products in order to make money, whereas I make money in order to make products."
And it was this exact mindset leading to the innovative yet doomed products such as the Sinclair C5, which meant Sinclair failed as a commodity product supplier, an area in which Amstrad excelled. With the Sinclair line on board, Amstrad could now claim a 60% share of the home computer market throughout Europe. Given their entry to computers had occurred just 2 years prior, this was one hell of an achievement. In September 1986, Amstrad also launched itself into the IBM PC compatible market with its PC 1512 machine. Like the PCW, this offered a low-cost way to get into a professional computing realm, and it sold rapidly, sparking numerous other machines for Amstrad in the PC-compatible marketplace. It was also around this time, with the arrival of a fresh-faced advertising executive known as Thomas Power, that Amstrad created its own marketing department. Yes, it had survived this far with no official marketing department, other than Alan Sugar and Malcolm Miller, Amstrad's marketing director.
12 Amstrad, écran, souris et logiciel à partir de 4 990 francs.
Whilst all this was going on, you might think that the CPC range may have been allowed to slide. After all, the Spectrum held twice as much market share. However, instead the Spectrum was simply positioned as a low-end gaming machine, and the CPC solidified its ground as a more professional affair that could be kept in the office and used by the kids to play the same games that other machines had. It's for this reason that Amsoft was a continually crucial element to the brand, churning out exclusive titles and conversions of titles that other developers were unwilling to do. It's evident from games specifically made for the CPC how much of an advantage the machine held in the graphical stakes. Although the Sinclair machines had caught up in the sound stakes with the AY chip added to the 128K models, the colour on well-made CPC titles was a treat for the eyes, with a brighter palette than the C64 whilst achieving the same resolution. The Spectrum was given the 3-inch disc treatment in August 1987 with the Spectrum Plus 3, around the same time that the CPC range was witnessing somewhat of a golden age in gaming. With some standout titles launched continuing through to the end of the decade.
Let's go, Mr. Driver!
It might seem strange that during 1988 the Amsoft User Club was sold off, but for Sugar it had served its purpose of helping put the CPC on the same ground as other platforms, and really now served little purpose to the company's bottom line. To keep sales strong, various CPC packages were released in this time, even changing the monitors to include a TV tuner as prices became cheaper. Rather than buying a television and a separate computer for your kid's bedroom, you could get both in one unit, continuing Amstrad's ability to throw common sense into houses throughout Europe. One bundle even included some 17 games, a joystick, a clock radio, and even a frigging desk. This really was the all-in-one solution. The Sinclair name would be used one last time in 1988 to try and revamp their IBM PC compatible line with the PC200. A system designed to look like an Atari ST or Amiga, but be PC compatible. Unfortunately, IBM PC compatible technology was drastically behind the Amiga and ST in terms of gaming and home use at the time, so it failed to take off. By 1990, Amstrad's profits were £90 million, thanks in part to their re-expansion into audio and electronics, along with their computing line. It was now 6 years after the CPC had launched, and machines such as the Amiga 500 and Atari ST were permeating into households, replacing the 8-bit crown with 16 shiny bits. There was speculation that Amstrad might move into the 16-bit range itself, which may have been a smart move, but instead it was deemed time for a revamp. Although the Sinclair machines were left to their own devices, still selling in the lower end, the CPC machines which came out of this revamp were styled much more like the Amiga, bringing a fresher look into the new decade. But not only that, these machines had a few new technical tricks to boot. Known as the Plus range, dropping the CPC tag and launching in September 1990, a 4096 colour palette was now standard, with 32 on screen at once and 16 hardware sprites available along with smooth pixel by pixel scrolling. Programmable DMA interrupts were even added to take any processor strain from the AY sound chip. And sound even comes out of the new restyled monitors rather than an onboard speaker now. All in all, some pretty well chosen improvements. The 464 Plus was exactly as you'd expect, a CPC 464 but with a few alterations along with the technical improvements. The cassette deck was still built in, albeit in a deeper position, cutting the elongated shape of the original unit. A cartridge port was added, allowing instantaneous booting of games, although the old edge connectors were removed in favour of more sturdy micro ribbon connectors, rendering old peripherals useless. There's also an RJ11 port for a light gun or pen, and a new analog joystick port similar to what you'll find on an IBM PC. Amstrad claimed that the new Plus features were only available to cartridge-based software. The reasons for this were to increase cartridge software production and to ensure the old CPC software would still run without accidentally triggering these new features. However, it was quickly discovered it's perfectly possible to utilise them by sending a specific 17-byte sequence, which some games and particularly graphical demos made use of. The 6128 Plus is, as you'd expect, the memory-boosted disk drive equivalent, but lacking the tape connector of the original 128 machine. To simplify region localization issues, the mainboard also lacks a system ROM, with it instead located on the bundled Burning Rubber / Locomotive Basic cartridge. This meant that the cartridge needed to be present to run tape or disc games, whilst other cartridges needed to include their own ROM chip, offering some basic copy protection measures. Alongside these new models, Amstrad also decided to take a step into the console market with the spaceship-looking GX4000. This was a time when many manufacturers were trying to repurpose their existing technology to fit into the console market. However, just like the Commodore with the 64 game system, it was just too late. The GX4000 was essentially a CPC in console form, launching for the cut-down price of £99 and providing SCART and RF connectors to hook up to your lounge TV. It sported the same technical improvements of the Plus models, meaning the cartridges were interchangeable, but in light of the new Sega Mega Drive and even existing 8-bit consoles from the big Japanese names, it was too little, too late to make an impact. With just 26 games released on cartridge, many of which just old CPC cassette games coded into ROM, it didn't ooze too much appeal. Although some games like Robocop 2 and Pang did provide owners with a glimmer of hope to cling on to. The GX was discounted to less than £80 within 8 months, and disappeared entirely not much longer afterwards. This would prove to be a case where the Amstrad effect just didn't have an effect. The only market with reasonable sales was faithful France, where the 6128 model sold into the tens of thousands. Although the Plus line wasn't the 16-bit upgrade Amstrad perhaps needed, placing it behind the new competition, truth be told, the only thing which really let it down were the continued use of chunky pixels, meaning everything seemed a little more blocky than rivals. Otherwise, it was graphically fairly capable, and some games of the era really revealed the potential of the hardware. Prince of Persia, for example, came remarkably close to its 16-bit iterations, and may explain in part why the old dog was still able to hang on into the 90s.
If you can't use this diary, alarm, address book, calculator and word processor in 5 minutes, you'll get your money back.
The Plus range was never a success and was shortly discontinued, with Amstrad moving into a period where Sugar declared one brand new product should be made per month. This happened to lead the company further and further into the communications industry as the 1990s chugged on, developing set-top boxes for Sky before being sold off in 1997, with its shares split between Vigeland and Betacom, before Betacom was renamed itself to Amstrad plc. Since then, the Amstrad emailer was launched in 2000 and the company have essentially moved into full-time satellite box manufacturing under the ownership of B-Sky B since 2007, with Sugar stepping down as chairman in 2008. But there's absolutely no doubt, in my mind at least, that the Amstrad CPC range of machines remains Alan Sugar's and Amstrad's most memorable contribution to the world. The Spectrum range clung on to 1992 before being discontinued, in the ever-favourable lower-end market, an area which the Commodore 64 managed to cling on to for even longer before Commodore's wind-up in 1994. In 1993, Amstrad would once again take a stab at the PC market with the help of Sega via the Mega PC. That indeed is a story definitely worthy for another day. The CPC sold some 3 million machines globally, with 650,000 alone in France. This figure is less than the 17 million Commodore 64s and 5 million Sinclair Spectrums, but still a significant slice of pie, for a computer which was really only designed to create a quick profit. Roland Perry remarked at the time that Amstrad would have been happy to sell 100,000 CPCs, but the end result far exceeded their expectations. Today, the CPC still retains an enthusiastic fanbase. EverDrive style cartridges for the Plus range have opened up the hardware to some slick programming, and just last year the CPC Retro Dev competition was held, yielding some nice titles, splashing colour all over that screen. Emulators such as WinApe opens up the library to a whole new generation of users, and it's definitely a system which should be experienced at least once. The Amstrad CPC was certainly a spark of genius and a triumph of common sense for Sugar, but it was the engineers and support teams around the machine who really put the love into it and made it the success it was. Without Amsoft placing a heavy concentration on encouraging programming among users or providing a solid user base, without MEJ and Locomotive creating something which went over and above the machine's original specifications, without magazines like Amstrad Action and the software houses who grew ever fond of the hardware, it wouldn't be the machine it turned out to be today. All in all, the CPC was a triumph of its time. It arrived late to the party, but it arrived in style. And the undying love for the machine that continues into 2017 is certainly testament to this very view. Thank you for watching the second part of the Amstrad CPC story. If you haven't seen the first part, then I like your disordered style. You can view it by clicking to the left. If you fancy sharing, subscribing, giving a thumbs up or even helping support my channel, then it's massively appreciated. Otherwise, I hope you have a good evening.